King Aldric IV was born during a period of territorial disputes between minor lords who competed for control of trade routes. His early years were shaped by administrative tutors who emphasized record-keeping, taxation systems, and the value of centralized authority. These teachings formed the basis of his approach to governance. When he reached adolescence, Aldric was placed in the care of military instructors who focused on logistics rather than battlefield prowess. He learned how supply lines, recruitment quotas, and seasonal planning determined a kingdom's stability. This gave him a practical understanding of warfare that favored preparation over spectacle. A succession crisis opened the path to his rise when his uncle died without legitimate heirs. Aldric presented detailed lineage documents and secured endorsements from influential clerks. The council accepted his claim because it aligned with their interest in avoiding internal conflict and maintaining consistent revenue collection. After taking the throne, Aldric immediately reorganized regional administrations. He replaced loosely supervised stewards with appointed officials who reported directly to the capital. This brought uniformity to tax distribution and reduced the authority of local nobles who had previously acted independently. Aldric also implemented standardized measurement systems for trade. By enforcing identical weights, scales, and tariffs across markets, he increased transparency and reduced disputes between merchants. This policy encouraged long-distance commerce through predictable regulation. His reign emphasized infrastructure expansion. Roads connecting agricultural regions to ports were repaired or widened to support heavier carts. Storage depots were built near rivers to create buffer reserves during years of poor harvests. These improvements increased economic resilience across the kingdom. Aldric maintained strict oversight of military expenditures. He created a registry of equipment inventories and rotated captains yearly to prevent the rise of private loyalties. This administrative model prevented fragmented command structures and strengthened central control. The king also expanded his diplomatic presence through written agreements rather than ceremonial alliances. He preferred treaties that defined boundaries, tariffs, and transit rights in measurable terms. This minimized ambiguous interpretations and reduced the likelihood of disputes escalating. Within his court, Aldric encouraged scholars who specialized in cataloging land surveys, census records, and tax ledgers. Their compiled reports allowed him to compare regional productivity and adjust policies accordingly. This emphasis on documentation became a hallmark of his rule. By the midpoint of his reign, Aldric had established a government known for its emphasis on order, compliance, and routine supervision. His administrative structure left little space for regional autonomy, creating a system in which regulations were enforced with consistency across all territories under his authority. The Boiling Tongs torture was categorized within the kingdom's procedural toolkit as a controlled thermal extraction method. Its primary purpose was to remove burned layers of flesh in a predictable manner. This allowed officials to assess compliance based on visible physiological responses rather than subjective interpretation. The tongs used in this method were constructed from high-carbon iron because it retained heat for longer durations. Blacksmiths crafted the arms with moderate curvature to ensure stable grip without crushing muscle tissue. The ends were shaped into shallow grooves to prevent slippage when attached to skin that had softened from exposure to heat. Before use, the tongs were placed in a brazier filled with charcoal that had been treated with resin for hotter combustion. The heating process followed a timed sequence monitored by an appointed assistant. The color of the metal served as the indicator because a uniform red hue signified consistent temperature across both arms of the tool. Guys, can you help me to hit 1,000 subscribers on this channel? And it's my dream. Sorry for interruption. It's humble request. Let's jump into the video. Once heated, the tongs were transferred using insulated clamps that prevented handlers from accidental burns. The assistants checked the stability of the hinge pins that allowed smooth pressure application. If any resistance appeared in the movement, The tongs were returned to the brazier for reheating or maintenance. The method applied to targeted regions such as the shoulders, arms, or calves to avoid immediate organ damage. Officials viewed these areas as suitable because they contained enough muscle mass for partial removal without endangering the subject's overall survival during the session. This created a measurable sequence of tissue extraction. The procedure required the subject to be secured to a wooden frame to eliminate body movement. Straps were tightened at the wrists, elbows, ankles, and knees to stabilize weight distribution. This positioning ensured the tongs contacted the skin at predictable angles, which maintained consistency from one session to another. Before contact, a clerk recorded the subject's baseline physical state. Observers noted skin temperature, pulse rate, and any visible injuries. These details were cataloged to create a standardized reference that allowed officials to compare outcomes across different cases. The heated tongs were then placed on the chosen area for a set duration measured by a sand timer. The initial contact caused the outer skin layers to carbonize and loosen. Officials relied on this reaction because it made extraction cleaner and reduced irregular tearing during the pulling stage. When the timer expired, the handler applied gradual outward pressure to lift the burned tissue. The curvature of the tongs guided the separation of the skin from underlying layers. This produced a controlled removal pattern that could be documented for administrative review. Between applications, the tongs were reheated to maintain uniform temperature. The process of reheating took less time during subsequent cycles because the metal retained residual heat. Assistants rotated tools in pairs to eliminate downtime and keep the session within regulated time intervals. A water basin was kept nearby not for cooling the tongs, but for cleaning debris between cycles. The water removed ash and carbonized fragments that could interfere with the metal's grip. This prevented contamination that might affect record accuracy. Medical scribes stood by to document tissue responses such as blistering speed and discoloration patterns. These observations were later compared with previously recorded cases to determine whether the procedure aligned with expected outcomes. The emphasis remained on consistency rather than improvisation. The boiling tongs torture was also governed by directives that limited the number of extraction cycles per session. Administrators believed predictable limits made results easier to evaluate and avoided impairing the subject beyond the intended threshold. This created standardized benchmarks that officials referenced during later interrogations. The tool's handle featured a double rivet design that allowed steady hand positioning. This minimized accidental rotations that could lead to uneven tearing. The reliability of the hinge system was essential because any irregular motion could invalidate the documentation. An iron rest was kept beside the brazier to hold the tongs during short intervals. This ensured the metal did not cool prematurely while officials conducted assessments. Temperature stability was critical for maintaining the method's consistency. The kingdom's workshops also produced variations of the tongs with slightly narrower tips. These were used for smaller extraction zones such as the upper arms. The narrower design concentrated heat more directly, allowing finer removal for cases that required detailed observation. The method required no supplemental chemicals because heat alone produced the intended reactions. This simplified storage logistics and reduced dependency on apothecaries. The absence of chemical agents also made the tool easier to maintain. Officials were instructed to avoid applying excessive pressure because crushing the tissue would interfere with clean separation. The objective was controlled detachment, not blunt force injury. This distinction helped maintain the procedure's reliability as an administrative instrument. Observers assessed the subject's reactions without intervening except in cases where vital signs deviated from recorded thresholds. If a reaction became inconsistent with expected patterns, the session was paused to determine whether environmental factors or tool defects were responsible. After each session, the tongs were submerged in a trough containing a mixture of water and lime. This cooled the metal while preventing rust accumulation. Blacksmiths inspected the tools weekly to ensure hinge alignment and metal integrity. Written manuals detailed the exact steps for operating the boiling tongs torture. These manuals included diagrams that explained grip angle, contact time, and pulling technique. The goal was to eliminate variation between handlers across different regions of the kingdom. Record keepers compared outcomes from multiple sessions to identify differences in tissue extraction thickness. Variability beyond accepted limits prompted reviews of the equipment or the training of the assigned handlers. This administrative system aimed to preserve procedural stability. The method was not designed to be fatal, but to create measurable physical responses that could be evaluated. Survival rates were documented to ensure the process remained within the functional parameters set by the governing council. These records formed part of a broader archive of enforcement practices. Officials regarded the boiling tongs torture as a technical method rather than a punitive spectacle. It was included in the kingdom's procedural register due to its predictable mechanics. This predictability made it useful for assessments that relied on observable physical indicators. The procedural use of the boiling tongs torture led officials to modify record-keeping systems. Clerks expanded their ledgers to include column categories for extraction cycles, recovery rates, and deviations in tissue response. These additions created a more structured reference archive for future administrative reviews. The data gathered from multiple sessions encouraged the development of uniform training modules. Handlers were required to complete written examinations on tool maintenance and temperature regulation. This transformed the method from a skill passed informally to one governed by standardized certification. Regional officers incorporated the technique into broader enforcement frameworks. They used it as one component among several regulated procedures designed to measure compliance. This integration allowed administrators to compare its consistency with other controlled methods in use across the kingdom. The presence of detailed manuals led to further bureaucratic expansion. New positions were created for inspectors who verified that procedures matched the established guidelines. Their reports contributed to an ongoing cycle of evaluation that shaped the governance structure. Medical scribes reviewing the collected data recommended controlled recovery intervals. These intervals provided predictable timelines for observation and reduced variability in recorded outcomes. The information also informed revisions to seating frames and restraint devices to improve stability. The kingdom's metalworkers adjusted manufacturing schedules to ensure reliable tool supply. They maintained inventories of tongs with matching specifications to prevent discrepancies in heat retention or hinge movement. Workshops began marking each pair with identification numbers to assist record tracking. As administrative reliance on documentation increased, archivists compiled long-term summaries for internal reference. These summaries organized cases by region, date, and procedural accuracy. They served as a catalog for comparing regional implementation and identifying areas needing recalibration. Some officials emphasized periodic recalibration of the brazier systems. They found that variations in fuel quality affected temperature stability. Standardizing resin-treated charcoal across regions contributed to greater procedural uniformity. The method's structured use also influenced judiciary scheduling. Courts allocated specific days for sessions requiring technical procedures so that handlers and scribes could coordinate tasks efficiently. This reduced delays caused by tool preparation or data entry. Oversight councils evaluated the long-term administrative effects of implementing such a regulated method. Their reviews highlighted increased uniformity in enforcement practices and a more consistent flow of information between regional offices. This showed how a single standardized procedure could shape bureaucratic development.